Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Thom Brex. I'm treasurer and member of the Board of Trustees of the Columbus Metropolitan Club, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. We do encourage you to tweet, however. Hashtag CMC Forum. You can follow CMC on Twitter at CBusMetroClub. These are also listed in the flyer that are at your seats. We have some really excellent programs coming up. Next week's forum promises to amaze you, as inventor and founder Rosh Youngs and CEO Kurt Dieck of Biosortia Pharmaceuticals tell us how they are pushing the development of new life-saving drugs by harvesting microorganisms found in water. You'll find this and other upcoming events in our new app, which is free for downloading, or visit our website at columbusmetroclub.org. I'd like to invite you to help us reach our goal of 1,000 members for this year. As a member, you receive discounts on weekly forums and many other tangible benefits, as well as the many networking friendships that we're all enjoying today. In the forum flyer is a list of everyone who's attending today, so why not just do it? Let's take a minute after today's forum and move your name from the guest list to the member list. Membership is easy and affordable on our website. Again, columbusmetroclub.org. You see the theme here? Please go to columbusmetroclub.org. I'm pleased to introduce new members here today, so please stand if you're here so that we can greet you. Maureen Withgott, Tom Withgott, Karen McVeigh from Tell Ohio Credit Union, Leslie Bumgardner from Tell Ohio Credit Union, Greg Dodd from the Columbus Metropolitan Library, and Teresa Harris from TMH Solutions. Let's welcome them. On the back of your forum program, please recognize the nearly 80 companies and organizations who help sustain CMC and our mission of community conversation through their sponsorship. The benefits of sponsorship are many, and there's always room for more. Please let us know if you're interested in learning more about this rewarding opportunity. Today's forum is sponsored by the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, represented here today by Adam Sharp and his associates, and Hannah News Service, represented today by Steve Marks and his associates. Let's thank them for their support. A biography for each speaker is in your forum flyer, so I'll only provide brief introductions. Tim Keene, the budget director for the state of Ohio, was planning to be with us today, but he was called out of town at the last minute to be with the governor. I'm happy to introduce his colleague from that office, the assistant director of the Ohio Office of Budget and Management, Chris Whistler. Our next panelist is Ohio's tax commissioner. Previously, he served as Franklin County recorder and Franklin County auditor for a combined 24 years. Please welcome Joe Testa. Our next panelist is an independent public policy consultant in the Columbus area. He served as editor for the third edition of Richard Sheridan's book, Follow the Money. Please welcome Terry Thomas. Our moderator today is executive director for the Center of Community Solutions. Previously, he was a healthcare system executive and served 3 terms in the Ohio House of Representatives. Please welcome John Bagala. On behalf of the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, Hannah News Service, and the Columbus Metropolitan Club, please welcome our panelists. And John, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Tom. Before we jump right into things here, I'd like to take about 30 seconds to mention a couple of things that you will find outside. The Center for Community Solutions is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. We have offices in Cleveland and Columbus. We focus on health, social, and economic policy and try to steer a middle course in a very polarized environment these days. We have out front the third edition of Dick Sheridan's book, Follow the Money. Some of you are too young to remember that Dick Sheridan was the first director of the Legislative Budget Office back when we had one. After he left state government, he came to Community Solutions and served there as a fellow for over 20 years. He wrote several books on state budgeting. Follow the Money is the one that really got traction. When Dick passed away a few years ago, we thought we were at the end of the line with that series, and then very fortunately found a former colleague of his in Terry Thomas, a panelist today, who was interested in helping bring the tables and the data in there up to date. I think he did a marvelous job of keeping both the wisdom and wit of Dick Sheridan in an era that needs that kind of objective analysis of the budget process. And we also have a new State Budgeting Matters, which is a publication that we put together. It is distributed also by one of today's sponsors, Hannah News Service. John Honick and Tara Delansky from our staff worked with Terry in trying to get the budget down to about a 20-page version. So it is 1/200th the length of the biennial budget bill. And for those of you who want the condensed version, it's available out there and also online. I'd like to posit a few questions here at the outset for each of the panelists, and then we'll just see where the conversation goes. So starting with Chris, overall, could you share with us the policy goals that are embodied in the budget?
Sure. Thanks, John, and thanks, Columbus Metropolitan Club, its distinguished members and guests. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. You know, if I had seen an advertisement for this event, as I kind of did since my boss had been invited to it, I would have thought this is the exact kind of thing I would like to come to participate in, to hear this kind of discussion, maybe work up some questions in the audience and think about how to maybe stump the experts. Lucky me. You know, I was told to keep this informal, picture it being like talking to friends at a party. And since my wife and I have 2 young daughters, most of our parties involve trampolines and cupcakes. And I'm not quite sure that that's going to work out today. But, you know, I'd like to start and talk a little bit about the framework of the budget. And to do that, I think it first has to start with Governor Kasich. And I would just say that I've been around the State House for almost 20 years now, involved in the budget in some way or another. And I've never seen anyone with as much urgency about getting things done and using the budget to do that. He is clearly our budgeter-in-chief, and it's not surprising given his long time in Congress and as chair of the Budget Committee. And in this, I think the experience has been with him that it's not like everyone's experience has been in the budget office from what I've heard over time, and that it's not a matter of working in your office and then bringing forward ideas and kind of briefing the governor on what you're going to do. Not at all. This is one where Governor Kasich sets the goals. He constantly challenges us to be more creative in our thinking, leave no budgeting stone unturned. And because of that, although it can be a bit exhausting, I will say, there's no better place to work if like me, you're someone who loves public policy and budget and thinks that the budget can make a real positive impact on the lives of Ohioans. You know, I think also that many of you are aware that we've been in constant budget mode since the beginning of this administration for the last 2 years, whether it was beginning with the first budget bill that had to close a projected $7.7 billion structural projected shortfall for fiscal years 12 and 13, moving straight into the first ever mid-biennium review, which there's rumors already that that's going to occur again this budget, and I know the analysts in our office are really excited. But it is a good opportunity because we continue to keep rolling. And now in this time, moving into this budget, it left us at a nice place to be prepared for what we wanted to accomplish in this budget. And we follow the same guiding principles we had from the start as we put together the 14-15 budget. And that's the budget as a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. And that means is economic development and job growth. It means that we want to, having restored Ohio's financial footing, we want to strengthen that footing and continue to ensure that the budget is stable and that folks know what to expect going forward. We also want to do a comprehensive review of the budget, all agencies, programs, line items, and make sure we leave no stone unturned. And we wanted to continue to reform and restructure state government to improve services. And I think we've done all that with this Ohio Jobs Budget 2.0, as it's been called. Is it perfect? Is anything? I think any book reviewer will be able to review and find and criticize and comment on someone else's books, and that's natural and it's good. And that's why the budget is a process. I've worked in the legislature before too. I understand and respect the process that is involved in the legislature, but it's a place to start, and I think it lays out the visions that Governor Kasich intended. I think it's a balanced approach to a budget that I think is so balanced, in fact, that it makes it difficult for what I would kind of call the professional critics to put it into rhetorical boxes. It was very difficult initially when the budget came out for people to figure out exactly what to say, because it is so balanced in many ways. But from our standpoint, we generally talk about the 5 major themes of this budget, and those would be tax reform, cutting taxes through tax reform, and we believe that reducing taxes is going to mean more jobs, and I'm glad Commissioner Testa is here to speak more about that. Education, funding, and reform. Clearly, better schools everywhere are going to create better opportunities for Ohioans. Higher education, focusing more on degree completion, is going to improve the workforce. It's going to better the position of Ohioans. Medicaid transformation, a number of things that are happening in there, both to control costs, restructure the delivery of services, looking at eligibility, and the transportation plan involving the turnpike, and looking for ways to continue to invest in our infrastructure so that we can position the state, again, for job growth. And I look forward to discussing these things with you. I guess I would say, as we start, I'm glad Commissioner Testa is here, because he is clearly an expert in the area of tax reform. I'm a utility player. There have been a number of experts, as you're aware of, testifying for hours on end in House Finance Committee and its subcommittees. And I would encourage you to look on websites, look for their testimony, listen to what they say as well. And I'm going to do my best, but I'll oftentimes have to defer to things that they would say, and would encourage you to seek out that information. So if I can, I was going to begin by reading Director Keene's testimony from House Finance. I thought it would describe the budget pretty succinctly. It only took 1 hour and 41 minutes, if I may.
Oh, please. That would simplify our task here today a little bit, I suppose. Commissioner Joe Testa, before I ask you to talk a little bit about the tax provisions that Chris mentioned, it just occurred to me listening about tax reform. This happens almost every budget. There's something in there that is tax reform. And back in the 70s, there was a member of the House, his name was John Johnson. He actually Ron Amstutz's predecessor, I think, from up there in Wayne County. John was an architect of, if not the sponsor of, the much maligned House Bill 920, and thought that he was trying to deal with an unpopular problem with the growth of property taxes, until he became the sponsor of that legislation, and then spent the rest of his life trying to explain what it was that he was done to everybody who was unhappy with the results of it. John got up on the floor of the House of the Representatives one day, and again, another tax revenue situation in the early 80s, and everyone was waiting for what he had to say, and he said, Mr. Speaker, a tax reformer is like a good rabbi, or a good tax reformer is like a rabbi, and just stopped, and the whole House was waiting for, okay, bring it on. He said, you have to be very careful of what you cut. So, Commissioner Testa, if you could tell us a little bit about the broad outlines of what it is that you all envision in this budget, it would be helpful.
I'd be glad to. We perform no surgery in the tax department, of any kind whatsoever. John, thank you very much. Jane, great to see you, and great to be here, and appreciate the opportunity to talk about a tax reform proposal. I'm going to digress for like 10 seconds and single out wonderful people in the room. Many of you I've known and worked with various times. I'm going to single out 2 who've just been great long-term public servants in this community, 2 people I've had the great opportunity to work with at various times in our respective careers. I'd like to point out and thank our former Mayor Greg Lashetka back here in the corner, Greg, and our former County Commissioner Dorothy Teeter. I don't know where Dorothy is. I saw her earlier. She's back there someplace. Let's say thank you to them for their great service to the community. And that's it for me. People have been asking, Joe, what has surprised you most about the tax reform proposal that you all have rolled out in this budget? And my answer is that I am surprised at how universally loved it is. I mean, I really thought some people would have some questions and problems with it, and it's just everybody's loving it and embracing it, and I'm just thrilled. So there you are. Major goals. What are we trying to accomplish with the tax reform? Chris already touched on it. Governor Kasich has one of his major goals in this area is to drive down income tax. Income tax in the state is still too high. Tax reform in 2005, which some of you in the room I'm sure were involved in, took a step, drove it down 21%. It's still too high. Our top rate is 5.925%, plus of course we have municipal income tax and school district income tax in the state. You pile that up and you look at our comparative states, and it's not competitive. It hurts us. So this is clearly one of the goals of this governor, is to drive down that income tax rate as far as we possibly can. He also is very, very big on small business, and so how we kind of put this thing together is with a couple of major pieces. The end result, the net, if you go to the end of the book and look at the last page, the end of the story is $1.4 billion tax reduction over 3 years. $1.4 billion down over 3 years. How do we do this? We've looked at the income tax, first of all, as I just mentioned, and said, you know, the small business in this state, in this country, they're the job creators. They're the innovators, they're the entrepreneurs. What can we do to try to address that? First big piece of this tax reform proposal is a 50% exclusion of small business income. And by small business, I'm not using SBA definitions, those who are familiar with those things. What we're saying is we're looking at pass-throughs. Because in Ohio, since we don't have a corporate income tax, if I'm talking income tax, I'm talking personal. Right? So if you're an LLC, an S-corp, or sole proprietor, partnership, and you derive your business income attributes to you in your personal income tax return, that's what we're talking about. There's 700-some thousand of them in Ohio. The 50% exclusion will be against your small business income. So whatever it is, up to a cap. We put a cap of it at $750,000, or a 50% exclusion would be $375,000. That then would be excluded from Ohio personal income tax. That's the first big piece. We're doing that because we believe in small business. We believe that they're the innovators, the creators. We've talked to many small business people since we started rolling this out who see ways in which they can expand their businesses. Some have told us it's going to buy that additional piece of equipment that they were going to buy, or expand their marketing, or perhaps they were really close to making a decision on hiring one more employee, and this will put them over the line and enable them to do that. So all of this is good. That's what entrepreneurs do. They try to grow their businesses, and that's what we're trying to do with this. So that's the first big piece. Second big piece is across-the-board income tax reduction. As I said, reform from 2005 took it down 21%. We're proposing taking it down another 20% over a 3-year period, which takes our top tax rate at 5.925 down to 4.74. Not far enough. We want to go further, but this state has become very dependent on personal income tax collections, and so it's a long way to go to get it down to much, much lower or zero. So we're not trying to do that at once. 20% cut this time over this 3-year period, phased in over 3 years, 7.5, 7.5, and 5. Those are the big pieces. One more small reduction, and that is the sales tax. Sales tax, the state sales tax is at 5.5%. We're proposing taking it down to 5, ratcheting it back 0.5%. How do we pay for this? How are we going to be able to provide for those kind of tax cuts and end up with a $1.4 billion net reduction overall? We looked at sales tax. We looked at a lot of different things. What has happened, and again, many of you know this very well, what has happened over the years is we have become more and more a service-based economy. In 1935, when sales tax was started, it was much more of a goods-based economy. That has changed over the decades. We're now 2/3 of all consumption is services, 1/3 goods. It has shifted, almost reversed from the 30s. The legislature has recognized this to an extent over the years by adding more taxable services to the taxable list over the many, many decades, and you know what many of those are. So what we decided that we took a look at this and said, you know what, we think it's time to take a bolder step here and start treating services as we do goods. In other words, put them on a level playing field so that services will be taxable unless specifically exempt, which is the exact opposite of the way it is today. Basically, what that does is it broadens the base pretty dramatically. It broadens the base about 30%. So then the task was, okay, what do we make exempt? What should be exempt when it comes to services? We try to narrow it as much as we can to a small list of items. It's medical, it's healthcare, it's education, it's housing, it's social services, those things that we believed, and just in our judgment, are the most essential kind of elements that affect everyone that pertains to our basic lives. So that's the list of exemptions. If you're not on that list, in our proposal, it's a taxable service. That means it will touch a lot of other professions that have not had to deal with this in the past. Again, what that does is that broadens the base about 30%, adds, we believe, more stability to the base because it's broader to begin with. We believe it's less regressive than a pure sales tax on goods because more of we who maybe are a little bit higher income level proportionally spend more of our income on services than we do on goods. So it tends to balance this out, adds more fairness, adds more stability to the overall tax plan or the sales tax portion of it. We also have to do one other thing. And I don't know how much longer I'm supposed to take with the opening statements, but one more important, those are the main pieces. But as you all know, county commissioners and transit authorities have piggyback sales tax. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. You all pay it someplace or another. Franklin County is 6.75%. Wherever it is, it's different amounts across the state. If we were to expand this base without addressing the local rate, it would have meant a $700 million per year tax increase on local consumers. Panic. We can't do that, all right? They'll just kill our tax reform proposal. So we had to address this. And I've talked to many county commissioners. Dorothy, I just talked to Dorothy a minute ago. So there's some concern about what we're doing with this. Let me explain what we're doing. What we recognize is this base is 30% broader. We can't just let that pass, that kind of a huge tax increase. So what we've done in the bill, in House Bill 59, is we have reset the local rates, the county rate and the transit authority rate, down, not to make it revenue neutral, to take out all the benefit of that base expansion, but down to a 10% guarantee year over year from 2012. In other words, instead of being a 30% expansion, they would get a 10% expansion. So we took it down to guarantee them 10% more than they took in last year. So for example, and it's a month-by-month calculation. So December of 2012, whatever that county took in, whatever the county commissioners received in sales tax, in December 13, they will get a minimum of 10% more than that, 10% growth. Why do we put that in there? A couple of reasons. One is because we want to recognize normal economic growth, which we think is around 5% or so. But we also, be honest with you, wanted to sweeten it a little bit, to make this a little bit more palatable, because during the 3-year period of this tax reform proposal, the county commissioners and transit authorities can't touch their rates. Now that took people's breath away for a second. And that, I've dealt with a lot of county commissioners and you're gonna do what? Yeah, because we're gonna build in this guaranteed 10% growth over the next 1.5-year period. So that's how we've addressed it. We've also addressed those counties. There are a few counties in Ohio that are growing faster than 10%. The oil and gas counties, for example, Carroll County, Harrison, Belmont, some of those counties are growing faster than that because of all the influx of additional sales in their communities because of the oil and gas boom. Well, they will be able to grow at whatever rate they have grown over the last 2 years. So they'll get the better of the two. So if they're growing at 15, 20%, one county is growing actually at 30%, amazingly enough, that will be their minimum. So they will not lose anything, they can only gain. If they take in more than that because their economy is going to grow faster, whatever comes into the tax department's theirs. The state's not going to keep a thing. It goes right out back to the community. So we think that this is a fair, balanced approach. We realize it took people's breath away for a second when we said we're going to take away their authority to change their rates for 3 years. But that's the way we're going to address it. So I've probably taken longer in my opening comments than I should have, but John, I'll give it back to you.
No, these are important details, and you mentioned the balanced approach. Those are words that our organization has used in describing this budget too. On the going over from the tax side to the spending side, healthcare, primary, secondary education, higher education, as always, are the big things that are there. Terry, you've had a lot of experience working in all of those areas. Any comments on the spending side of this you'd like to share, or in the budget in general?
Well, I would agree with what Chris said and what you just said, John. And by the way, it's also, I agree, it's wonderful to be here today with this organization. This is a balanced approach in the budget. There are many things that everyone would find, or some side, I guess, would find desirable, and then others would find desirable on the other side, and I guess that's what makes for an interesting mix in politics. But it is a balanced approach, and as such, I think it's a bit of a break from the partisanship that we've seen in Columbus, and I think there's been an increasing sense of partisanship that's gripped Columbus perhaps since as far back as 1971, when the initial individual income tax and corporate franchise taxes were first levied. And I think at times we don't notice how partisan we've become over time, or how separate we've become over time, simply because we pale in comparison when compared to Washington, thank goodness. But at least in terms of what I mean by a break from partisanship, there's certainly things, obviously, for conservatives to enjoy about the budget, the way the taxes are reduced overall by, is it $1.4 billion, and yet at the same time, you know, maybe there's some consternation among those same conservatives and perhaps Democrats and more progressives might be encouraged by the expansion in Medicaid, which will, you know, provide increased health care access to so many more Ohioans and help so many people provide access in mental health and in developmental disabled population, and also in terms of education equity too, the fundamental principles that are behind the new proposed formula for primary and secondary education. So I think there's certainly one of the themes, I would say, of the budget is that it's a bit of a break from some of the partisanship that we may have seen in the past. Perhaps more importantly, I think, and I think the governor said it similar to this. I'm sure you gentlemen know exactly how he said it, but he certainly in this budget was not afraid to think big. To go long and deep and to try for some really big changes. There was an article a week or so ago by Brent Larkin in the Plain Dealer entitled "Small Change, you know, Won't Fix Big Problems," and I think that's such a truism. And indeed, the governor is really seeking some major change and reform, not only in this budget, but I think also in the last budget, and you know, because of the gap that needed to be closed. There was a chapter that is in both the current new edition of Follow Money and also in the previous edition by Dick Sheridan, but it was had to be edited substantially because it talked about impediments to budget reform. And one of the things it talked about was entitlements, and how entitlements really limit the ability for government to reform itself, to reset itself. And one of the entitlements that Dick focused on at some length was local government and the local government fund, et cetera. Well, I think the governor showed in the last budget that, you know, whether you agree with these things or not, and they're certainly open to debate, that, you know, that was not insurmountable change. And there are very few things, perhaps in the state budget, perhaps other than Medicaid, that really are not as touchable in that way. He also took on other things in previous budgets too, whether it be privatization, which was continued in this budget, and rehab and corrections, and also in youth services, or in the mid-biennium review, which is certainly a not an ordinary kind of a corrections a bill. But other things I think where the governor was able to think big is that Commissioner Testa mentioned that in the past the legislature and governors had looked at broadening the sales tax, but never, ever in such a comprehensive way. I mean, every 2 years the Ohio Department of Taxation puts out a really fine publication that is a piece of the budget, the blue books, if you will, on tax expenditures, and it just shows how much money we actually provide as a state in tax breaks to our citizens and our companies through tax expenditures. And it's something that doesn't get the attention, perhaps, that it has deserved over the years. Well, apparently, this administration was looking at that and very deeply, and certainly have made a lot of efforts to broaden the sales tax, which that is one aspect of the budget, certainly, which I would applaud them for. Another big, broad brush stroke in the budget, of course, was the broadening of, in addition to the broadening of the sales tax, was the income tax reductions in the budget, of course. For 30 years, ever since the 1983 changes in the income tax, which Governor Celeste let be called the 90% income tax, but it really wasn't quite that. But ever since that change, since fiscal year 1984 all the way to the present fiscal year, the income tax has always been the preeminent source of state revenues for 30 consecutive years. You know, that gap has sometimes been larger, and sometimes it has been more narrow, depending on the state of the economy, depending on changes in law that may have been made. Certainly, if enacted in the way the budget is currently constructed, the governor's budget, you will have definitely the income tax is still going to be a very major contributor to the revenue sources of the state, but nonetheless, not nearly so much as the longer-standing sales tax. The governor's not yet quite achieved his campaign goal in 2010 of eliminating the income tax altogether, but maybe I should say at least not yet. We'll have to see if there are future budgets and what they might hold. And another change I see in terms of funding formulas, which is always something I like to focus on, is in the primary and secondary education formula. There is a continuing focus, as there has been since the DeRolf time, on funding equity. You know, the core opportunity money, the targeted resources component, all speak to equity. But it strikes me that there's been a major departure from other initiatives in the past that have tried to, and I don't know how many different governors have tried different formulas, but certainly there was, you know, Governor Voinovich had some effort with the sales tax issue that went to the ballot, and then Governor Taft had the building blocks formula, and of course Governor Strickland had the evidence-based funding. But this initiative, unlike some of those other initiatives, doesn't focus on the issue of adequacy nearly as much, focusing on what is the ideal cost of funding in education, what is, in terms of a student's perspective, what is needed for that. We kind of get away from that, but certainly it does have an intense focus on the equity issues. So I think there's a number of broad items in this budget, some of which I applaud, not all, but it strikes me that the thing that I would singularly think the governor should be congratulated for just is his ability to think broad. You know, governors have to govern, and it's, you know, and that's why we've seen so many perhaps Republican governors, and Governor Christie announced, I think just yesterday, that he was supporting the Medicaid expansion. You know, you have to address issues of education equity, et cetera. So these things require broad thinking beyond just your base level of supporters in order to get the job accomplished. It's not like in Washington where we don't have to balance you know, the abacus in terms of revenues and expenditures as much. It's a different ball game here, and we need to think differently, and this budget does that.
I'd like to talk about a couple details here before we throw it open. In about 10 minutes, we'll throw it open for questions from the floor, but there are a couple things I'd like to get out there. One is ballpark. All funds and general revenue fund, are we seeing growth in spending in this budget, or a flat line, or a decline with all of the changes? Overall, what's happening on the spending side?
I'll take that. The all funds budget in fiscal year 14 is $63.7 billion, and then in 66.8 billion in FY15. The general fund budget is a little less than half of that. Both the all funds, which is, there's some accounting quirks to an all funds budget, but the general fund budget, both increase. But I would say that there's reasons for that, that change. If you look at the general revenue fund budget, actually includes the deposit of Medicaid reimbursement, a large part of Medicaid reimbursement from the federal government. So it's sometimes easier to talk about the state share of the general revenue fund budget. That budget is about $21 billion in 14 and 21.6 in 15. So there is growth of the state share GRF budget by 5.4% and 2.5%. However, the reason for that is related to the investments in primary and secondary education, and also the costs of Medicaid, not due to the Medicaid extension that Terry talked about of coverage, but due to the so-called woodwork costs related to the Affordable Care Act, that the individual insurance mandate means that the common way to refer to it is people who are currently eligible for the Medicaid program, quote, come out of the woodwork and sign up for the program because they need to find insurance coverage. And those folks coming on to Medicaid, because they're currently eligible, means that the state will have to pay its share of those costs, which is like 37% at the current match rate. So because of those things, the general revenue fund budget state share goes up 5.4% and 2.5%. But if you take those out, both education, K-12 education and Medicaid, it goes up by 2.2% and 2%. If you then take out the higher education increases, the increases in the debt service that we have to pay for outstanding debt for the state, and also the property tax relief that the state pays to local governments and school districts, the state GRF budget grows by about 1.6%, then actually declines by, I think, 0.2%. So there's a lot going on in that budget. Then again, if you throw in the federal share in the general revenue fund budget, it goes up by a little over 10% that first year because it's bringing in the additional federal reimbursement related to Medicaid.
So overall spending and GRF spending are both inching their way up in this budget, notwithstanding the reduction in the overall tax burden that is in there. So you mentioned higher education, and let's go there for a moment, because there hasn't been as much talk about this as what one might expect. There's a change in the philosophy and the way colleges and universities would be receive their state aid that is embodied in the budget. Perhaps you could describe that. And Terry, you've worked a lot in higher education. Maybe you could comment on that.
Right. I do think sometimes, in fairness, that the former formulas that the Board of Regents had are a bit maligned. I mean, because they did focus on enrollments, which is certainly a need in Ohio to have more in higher education. Also focused on average costs, so that the same English course at Miami University is reimbursed on the same basis as one at Columbus State Community College, and that really held down cost as well as increased enrollments over time, which are not necessarily bad things. But a number of years ago, the higher education community did see the need to move towards degree completion and some better metrics in that regard. So back, I think about 2009 in their budget, they began to have success points, as they called it, for community colleges to recognize that course completion and significant milestones towards transfer would be rewarded, and also for the universities that there would be a focus on degree completion, but also a focus on course completion. Governor Kasich's budget really ramps this up. It really changes the focus so that there is a much more significant emphasis on degree completion, a little bit less with the universities on course completion. It kind of changes the ratios between those two. And also for community colleges, it focuses more on those success points and different stages of transfer and course completion and degree completion than was previously the case. One of the things that has not been discussed at all in the formula changes, which I think is a real plus from my perspective, is that it is going to be a much more dynamic formula. When I was working and serving on some of the consultations on higher education funding when I was with the Ohio Association of Community Colleges, I'd always be real excited about a change that we were able to do. And then I saw when they would run the formulas, there would be, well, some schools are on a 3-year average, moving average, and others are on a 5-year moving average, and then we have the guarantee to make sure that nobody gets less funding than the previous year. and by the time you water it all down, you didn't have as significant an impact as you thought you would have. This budget, you know, with, I think at least of fiscal year 15, removes those guarantees. So you're going to see when a university or college has a significant increase in degree completion, it will be pretty much a zero-sum game in terms of moving monies from one to the other. So everybody will still be on a 3-year average, because you can't have aberrations from one year to the next a little bit, particularly for smaller institutions. But you're going to see a much more free-flowing formula than you have in the past, which, by the way, is one of the issues that I might have with primary and secondary education. You know, if there were more dollars in the formula, perhaps it might work better. And I think down the line, it's going to be an excellent formula for funding primary and secondary education, but my concern at this juncture would be is that with the guarantee, when you have, you know, virtually 2/3, 65% or so of the school districts on a guarantee as you have this time, it's really hard to consider it a very working or operating formula. So I see a disconnect between primary and secondary and higher ed on that. But I think that's something that will happen. But I think we're not going to really see the full impact of the formula in primary and secondary education until we move, perhaps, into the next biennium.
Yeah, note of caution on the primary and secondary education numbers too, and this is something that we got into in a little bit of detail, because the initial response on the guarantee in Cleveland was, in the city of Cleveland, initially was big disappointment. We're not getting anything more. We have a lot of low-income students, so on and so forth. The flip side of that, though, is when you start to get down into the details, the student enrollment in Cleveland continues to plummet. The amount that is spent by the state per student in Cleveland is about 3 times what it is in any of the 30 other school districts in Cuyahoga County. There are increases for Youngstown, Lorain, Akron, Canton. All of them scoot up. So the formula does kick in some places, and it does provide that protection on the backside. But we've been dealing here with 40 years plus. I mean, it goes back way beyond the first attempts at equal yield. But trying to get a formula that actually works and doing it all at once is expecting an awful lot, especially given all of the other things that are on the table.
If I may also, John, the numbers haven't been updated. We've essentially been working without a formula in primary and secondary education for the last couple of bienniums. So there's been certain districts where you mentioned enrollment drop-off, but there's been certain districts like Olentangy, in Delaware County, where we have huge enrollment growth over the last 4 years or so that really hadn't been factored in, and that has played a part in where we are right now.
I'd like to ask about a couple things, if I may, and then we're going to throw this open in about 2 minutes. I want to get these questions in of things that are not in the budget or not addressed, at least to my knowledge. One is that with all the tax reform, let me step back for just a moment. State and local taxes have been the subject in Ohio of political ads forever. Those who say we're a high-tax state can cite certain data, and depending on the data they cite, they're right. Those who say, well, no, we're a low-tax state, can cite other data, and in effect, they're right, because it all depends on what you have in there. State taxes were kind of middling, but local taxes in Ohio, just about everybody agrees. We not only have lots of different types of taxes, property, income, sales, piggyback, so on, but we have lots of different taxing districts. That was the subject of a lot of discussion 2 years ago when you all had a crisis to deal with, and people were hopeful, I think, that maybe there'd be more done on the local tax front. There's an awful lot of state tax reform here. Any thoughts about how this might interact with doing anything on local taxes?
Do you want to talk about the LGF and stuff?
I think that would be good for you to do.
I talked about the one aspect of local tax that we are addressing that I talked about in my opening remarks is the piggyback sales tax. In our proposal, we're not addressing, other than that, not addressing local tax. We're not addressing municipal income tax, school district income tax. We're not addressing any of those aspects of tax in general in Ohio. I will say, though, that there's no question we've got extremely complex tax system in the state. It is clearly one of the factors that causes our ratings, if you care about that kind of stuff, to be as low as it is because of the complexity of our tax code, complexity of local taxing districts, municipalities, and school districts, et cetera, et cetera. So it is clearly an area that probably needs to be addressed. There have been some attempts to address it in some kind of on the margins kind of a perspective bill in the House last year, and I think it's been reintroduced this year to address some of the things at the municipal level. But there's no question that holds us back because of the complexity and the cost of small business to try to comply with all of that. We didn't include it in this budget, in this proposal. That's true. But clearly, there's some steps that need to be taken to help make this much more business-friendly, taxpayer-friendly state at the local level as well.
I'll get to the other question in a moment. If anybody was interested in speaking up to stepping up to the microphone and asking a question, please do. And by the way, I didn't mean with that last question to suggest it. My wife tells a story that is really quite funny. Years ago, she was watching something on the tube, and Simon Wiesenthal was on talking about hunting Nazis for the better part of his adult life, and the challenges and the awful people that he had encountered in the course of this. And they threw it open for questions after that, and the first person got up and said, well, you know, all of that Nazi hunting is fine, but what are you going to do about the boat people? Okay, never mind. I didn't mean to kind of be piling on here and suggesting that you've done an awful lot in the budget, that somehow there's an inadequacy here for not taking care of the taxes as well. So anyway, do we have somebody there at the microphone who will spare me trying any more attempts at humor? Yeah, go ahead.
George O'Donnell. Lowering the sales tax and private income tax and funding education, a source that hasn't been discussed. Fracking in Ohio is a bonanza for the next 3 to 10 years, and one would expect that you could do better in terms of taxing that industry, primarily entities from Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, wherever, and taking care of those issues, as well as maybe a slush fund for the degradation of the natural resources and repairing roads that are going to be damaged by the trucks. So how would you like to talk about taxing the fracking?
I could talk about that much longer than you want me to. Parts of that the tax department doesn't have anything to do with, and that's the regulatory side. That's an ODNR and an EPA issue, so I won't deal with that side of it. But on the tax structure itself, we believe, and unfortunately not everyone agrees on this point, but we believe that the governor believes very strongly that this is a one-time resource. Okay, maybe another 10 billion years we'll have it again. But I mean, basically, this is a one-time resource. It comes out of the state of Ohio once. And he believes very strongly that all Ohioans should benefit from it. That's why when we put this severance package together, this is part of our tax reform. In other words, it's part of what enables us to drive those income tax rates down, give that small business tax cut that I just talked about a few minutes ago. That's part of it. The expansion of the base obviously is a big part of it too, but severance is part of it as well. When we did our studies, we did our research, started this year and a half ago, looking at the oil and gas producing states around the country, and compared severance tax rates for natural gas and for oil and natural gas liquids and so on. We were very, very low. As a matter of fact, we're very much at the very bottom. So clearly, there is an opportunity here to do something for all Ohioans at the same time. What is the proper rate to set it at? Again, some people think that we're setting it for the fracked horizontal wells at 4%, 1.5% for the first year for some cost recovery, and then 4% for natural gas liquids and oil. That still keeps us very, very low compared to the oil and gas producing states around the country. There are some people out there advocating that it should be higher, But we think this is high enough. We think it's enough to enable us to help us drive down those income tax rates, at the same time not be too punitive in terms of this kind of growing new industry in the state. We want it to grow. We need it to grow. This is a great opportunity for Ohio, and creating jobs and opportunities in parts of the state that have not seen a whole lot of activity for many, many years. So this is a good thing to do. But how do we find that proper balance? We think that the levels that we put in there accomplishes both. And the other thing you mentioned is impact, and I'll just use this, the impact, and that is these fracked wells, these horizontal wells, have a big footprint. Up front, they have a big footprint, a big impact on local communities. And it's all up front. It's all when they do the initial drilling. After that, they're pretty much self-sustaining, and then they move on to another site and drill some more. So we built in a $25,000 per well in our proposal impact loan. It's actually a loan. It's put up front and it's paid back over time. I could explain that. But basically, they try to put money in the hands of the county commissioners, the townships, et cetera, up front to help them mitigate the big impact that they have with all this truck traffic, all the pressure on police and fire and water and sewer and everything else that they do. So we have tried to address that, we believe, adequately, and again, try to find a balanced approach. George.
Please introduce yourself and
My name is Al Gobble, and I'm the leader of Blue Dublin. My question is, other than the federal income tax, what progressive tax do we have in Ohio? Since Republicans have eliminated the progressive inheritance tax and are going to be eliminating the progressive Ohio income tax, I believe there's nothing left. Now, our country was built on progressive taxation. Our best growth was in the 50s when the marginal tax rate was 91%. To get my complete analysis of this budget and school funding, please take one of my handouts. I have a 5-page analysis of the good and the bad of these this budget and school funding proposal.
Chris, would you like to respond to that one?
Sure. The tax-related question, I guess the first thing I would respond to, and Commissioner Testa, obviously you're the man with the facts, but I would say that this proposal, although Governor Kasich would in fact like to continue on the path of reducing the personal income tax will still be in existence. We are talking about a very progressive tax structure in the personal income tax. This is lowering rates across all rate brackets. You want to say anything else?
No, was it Hal? Did I get Al? Okay, Al. Al, I'll be interested in reading your analysis, so I'll only get a copy of it. But Chris said it. I mean, we have a quote progressive income tax structure that's been in place for a long period of time. We believe that lower taxes is better. It's just the philosophy of our administration. Low is better. So if we can take sales tax down, we can take income tax down, we will prosper, we will grow. If you look at, I know you don't agree, but that's all right. If you look at states that are growing faster than the rest of us, it's the states with the lowest tax impact. So again, we want to be there. Ohio is a great state. We've got a lot of great things going for us. There have been some great tax reform initiatives that have happened in the past. We think we need to continue on that path so that we can incentivize and support those who create jobs, the entrepreneurs, those who are the creators in our community, and support them so that they can grow and build our economy and employ more people. That's our philosophy.
Just one comment.
One question, I'm sorry.
Okay. I want to say that there's $2 trillion of almost free money, so we don't need more capital.
Okay. One thing, though, that I'd like to follow up on in that regard, with regard to the various tax proposals, is the scope of and the size of the exemption on the S corporation exemption, 50% up to $750,000, and the impact, the choice there, say, versus bringing the sales tax down another 0.5% or something like that. What's the thinking in terms of how the administration went about weighting the various aspects of this? as it relates to who pays which taxes and that sort of thing.
Well, the small business, it's clearly a small business focus. So that was clearly one of the governor's primary goals, as I mentioned earlier, is what can we do to help support and incentivize small business. So that was clearly a point. Once we sort of figured that out or had that as a target, then we started looking at ways in which we're going to be able to further drive down the income tax rates, which is the 20% over the 3 years. And then it's a series of going through processes, different methodologies, different way we look at how we're essentially going to pay for it. And there's a lot of different proposals that have been kicked around during that time, as subsequent to our rollout of our, we don't want to try this and try to do that. It's a balancing act. I mean, how far should we go? We've heard everything from the sales tax should be taken down lower to the sales tax should be taken up. The income tax should be made more progressive instead of, I mean, we've heard all of those. So there's judgment calls in there. It's an attempt to be balanced.
Yeah, you got the question, and you got to it, I think, with the small business focus.
That was sort of up the front number one,
yeah.
yes.
Is there one more question?
Yeah. Hi, just a quick one, and this is maybe a funner question. And I think it relates to a tax expenditure in that it's an uncollected tax. I remember a dispatch article, I think several months ago, about the internet sales tax, and perhaps something like 5,000 citizens in Ohio actually paid that when they filed their state taxes. So we're missing apparently millions of people who are purchasing things over the internet and not paying a sales tax. So just your thoughts on that.
What I have learned is that Ohioans are absolutely honest and pay every dollar. I never knew that before, and now after 2 years I finally figured that out. Two different things. One is the use tax, which is the companion, if you will, of sales tax. You buy an item across state lines. By federal law, they don't have to collect it. If they do it voluntarily, fine. If they don't, you have a use tax obligation. It will work the same way in that with services, by the way, because it's the same law. But the other is internet. It's not a state issue. It's a federal issue. It's a commerce clause. It's a issue. There have been bills in Congress. There are some today, as we speak, possibly moving. We don't really know, but we are estimating. There are several different studies that have been done to try to estimate what would it mean to Ohio if that was lifted. We're estimating somewhere in the range of about $350 million a year, something like that, to Ohio, if that was taken away. In other words, if Congress passed Main Street or one of the two bills or three bills, whatever it is, and set that across state lines. There are good arguments. I mean, the world has changed, obviously. There's a lot of sales going on the internet remotely. There's also the fairness to the brick and mortars. The businesses who are here that are physically in the middle of our community, who have an anti-competitive, in other words, their competitors have a competitive edge. So we are sensitive to that. We can't fix it at the state level. Some states have tried and have gotten slapped down by the courts. We don't want to go there, but this has to be dealt with at a national level.
Joe, I think we're at the state that we need to pass the microphone back to our host.
Thank you. Hope you enjoyed today's forum. You can see it again and share it with others on YouTube, which has a link at the CMC website. You're welcome to continue today's conversation with the speakers over coffee and cookies in the lobby. Don't forget, we recycle our name badges. If you want to be included on our mailing list, please put one of your business cards inside and drop it in the basket outside. Be sure to register for next week's forum, Algae, the Pharmacy Factor. Let's thank our sponsors once more, the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation and Hannah News Service. And also, let's thank our speakers, Chris Whistler, Joe Testa, Terry Thomas, and our moderator, John Below. Thank you all. Have a good day.